Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at You Retrospective. In today's installment of the Retrospective, we shall be covering episode 69, Trick or Treat, or as it's known in the Japanese original, ecotour of Whispy's Forest. This episode was originally released in Japan on February 8th, 2003, as the 69th episode. Then, the English dub, done by the infamous 4Kids, was released on April 10th, 2004 in North America. This episode's name is based off Trick or Treat in the English dub for some reason, despite it not being a Halloween episode at all. But what is this episode about, then, you may ask? Well, let us start with the plot of the episode and see if we learn the meaning of life. This episode opens to a shot of Whispy Woods in the morning, where Castle Dedede overlooks it from a higher angle. The camera closes in on the forest. We see a chef-like shadowy figure dumping trash. But then Tough emerges from the brush, catching Kawasaki in the act of illegally dumping in the woods. He flounders, trying to escape, but Tiff confronts him, disappointed that he'd dump garbage in the woods. Desperate to defend himself, Kawasaki says everyone does it. Tough interrupts this fallacious logic, pointing out that trash is everywhere. We see in the background some people running, but it's hard to be certain who exactly they are, which is intentional. Tough and Kirby call them out as they flee. Kawasaki explains to Tiff that the whole town is guilty of this illegal dumping. Tiff sighs and asks, when will people learn to care about and treat nature with respect? We then cut deeper into the forest, where Tiff, Tough, and Kirby are caring for some of the flowers around Whispy Woods. Whispy Woods thanks them for the help and says that they're glad to see at least some town folk care about nature. Tiff says she loves the woods as much as Whispy does, and Tough says that he ought to kick out anyone who dumps in the woods. His sister Tiff goes further, saying that he should ban anyone from entering the woods in order to protect it. But being accepting of all people, Whispy denies this, saying that his woods are open for everyone. It is here that we see the first change between versions. In the Japanese original, Whispy Woods makes no suggestions of what to do, and Tiff comes up with an idea of having an eco-tour to raise awareness of Whispy Woods. But in the English dub, for some reason, Whispy Woods then suggests that they find a way to get townsfolk interested in the beauty of nature via like an eco-tour or something. Both versions are perfectly fine. Anyway, in the English dub, Tough asks how, to which Whispy Woods suggests that they do some nature tours to get tourists into the forest. Kirby is excited, holding a water can, and cheers as we then cut to the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we cut to Castle's library, where we see Tiff, Tough, and Kirby are seen working on stuff for their eco-tour, with Tiff making a brochure for the trip. She shows it to her brother to see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, the image of a campy in the woods has pink, bubbly text that reads eco. 4Kids, for some crazy reason, remove this. It just seems like a waste of effort for something so meaningless. Were parents really that bad back then? I don't know. Honestly, you could say it's a pretty minor change, but still, I think it's a stupid alteration. We see Tiff explaining to her brother what an eco-tour is as Dedede waddles in. He peeks over the bookshelves, listening in on the plan, with Escargoon. The conversation with Tiff and Tuff continues as Tiff says she got help, pointing it to Kirby, who is helping, but are rather perturbed by Kirby showing them a watermelon drawn by him. And I mean, people like to say it's a bad drawing, and admittedly, Kirby isn't the best artist, but I think it's okay for a baby. The two laugh harmlessly. The king comments that an ecotour is a great idea, to which Escargoon suggests they steal it. The king agrees and says it's a great opportunity to deal with Whispy Woods and construct his country golf club. We cut to the next day and see an airing of channel DDD where we see Dedede announce his first eco tour. This announcement shocks Tiff and her family, who are watching it. She is appalled, while her brother points out how Dedede took her idea. We see the mayor and his wife watch Dedede as he struggles to explain what an eco tour is, but Escargoon saves the advertisement by saying each tour is a surprise. This gets Spikehead excited as he, Iroh, Honey, and Kawasaki watch from the local restaurant. We then cut to the police station where Bookham says it could be fun as a survival test as he, grabs his belly, adding that it could also help him stay in shape. The prisoner Doron laughs at him. We cut back to the woods as Dedede and Escargoon start the eco tour. Escargoon informs the group that there won't be any pampering as it'll be a hard journey and tells them to pick up a backpack. The group does so as instructed, with Iroh reluctantly saying, "Let's get moving." The king complains that the tour group is too small, but Escargoon assures him that it'll be enough to do their dirty plan. Spikehead wonders why the bags are so heavy, while Honey says it's probably their lunches, and Ira says the lunch must be big. Bookham's wife is looking forward to it. Mayorland Blustergas says it's going to be a wonderful day, as it has some good weather. Oddly, however, Bookham's wants it to rain for a greater survival challenge. Not something that, even I as a nature enthusiast would like, but to each his own, I guess. Escargoon tells them it's time to head off, but are stopped by Tiff. She lambasts the pair for not knowing the first thing about hosting an eco tour. Dedede denies this, flagrantly lying and saying that he's always loved nature, which Tuff calls him out for his blatant BS, which it is. Tiff then asks the obvious question of if they love nature so much, why do they always try to destroy it? Referring to their previous goals of building a country club. Escargoon in turn tells them to buzz off, but Dedede says they can tag along if they respect the woods. Tiff explains that she respects the forest far more than they do, while her brother gets packed to go on the tour. Escargoon hopes they brought a muzzle for him, and the group head off into the woods. Tiff thinks to herself, rightfully, that Dedede is up to something. We then see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, there is a short scene of the group entering the forest looking in awe around, before cutting to some birds flying overhead. The English dub removed this, instead cutting directly to the birds, likely to better fit in the airing time restraints seen in North America. Honestly, this change does slightly bother me, but it's not really a big deal. The group continue into the woods, seeing all sorts of wildlife. They pass a beautiful waterfall, which Dedede sadly only views as a good water hazard. We see fish in the group, swimming down as Dedede comments on the flat ground. The mayor, watching this, says the king really does have, an appreciation for wildlife, while Bookham's wife says that this must have been some sort of deeply hidden appreciation. The two are secretly discussing a good place for a clubhouse, which Escargoon points out and the king agrees with. The Bookham's wife says the air is so clean, with the mayor saying it's the best view he's ever seen. Thirsty, Dedede and Escargoon pull out some cans of soda as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, there's a kanji-like mark on all of the soda cans. For whatever reason, 4Kids saw fit to airbrush it out. Just seems like a odd instance of censorship and frankly a waste of time given how little impact these marks have. After a long drinking session, they throw the cans on the ground. Tiff sees this and calls them out for, failing as an eco tour guide. and that they should be more concerned about the environment, and to litter so recklessly is foolish. Escargoon and Dedede dismiss her as a pain in the neck. The group continue to the next area. We see the group measuring trees. Tiff, Tuff, and Kirby watch from a hill, confused by this. As we then see Dee Dee Escargoon approach a large tree to mark it for a bulldozer. The king pulls out a knife and marks it. However, he is called out by Tiff, who asks what are they doing to that poor tree. King Dedede lies and says that he was just carving his initials on the tree. Tiff asks him how he'd like it if someone carved him up, and the king says he'd like it more than having to deal with her school monitor like excessive rules. Tiff then calls him out for that, for as why would they have an ecotour if they don't care about nature? The king is annoyed, but Escargoon reminds him of the plan that the ecotour is just a cover story, and the two calm down and go along with it, with King promising to be better to the girl Tiff. The group continue further into the forest. Honey goes to pick one of the beautiful flowers, but Tiff stops her, saying that they are here to observe nature and leave it for future generations. The mayor goes to pick a green fruit, but is stopped by Tiff, who says they can't have any fruit. And even if they fall on the ground, not that you'd want to eat fruit on the ground. She even calls out Kirby, who stops eating the fruit and falls from the tree. Escargoon points out to the king a good place for a sandpit. The king goes to investigate as the mayor walks, but Tiff stops him as he almost stepped on a flower. The mayor says this is quite a tricky trip, while Chief Bookham says this eco tour is no fun. And Tiff says that he's wrong, as it's more fun due to being educational, which, if you know anything about educational video games, is just not true. We see a quail family, which Spikehead, Honey, Dee and Escargoon look at. The king says that they look good with some barbecue sauce. Tiff walks up to them and tells them birds deserve to be in the wild, not on plates, causing the birds to flee. Spikehead and the others complain about how they can do nothing but look, and Tiff sighs at their superficial attitudes. Bookham's wife then picks up some handful of leaves, hoping to clean up the place. Tiff stops her, claiming that the leaves provide nutrients to the soil, which is true. The old lady is shocked while the king laughs at a badly made pun he makes, causing her to sigh. The group have a picnic near a river. Tiff pulls out a jelly donut, rice ball, which Kirby then eats with joy. The mayor and his wife have a wonderful compliment on how the meal tastes great, but are interrupted by Police Chief Bookums, who catches a huge fish with his bare hands, but is stopped from eating it by Tiff, who reminds him to be kind to animals. He is a bit shocked by this, as Escargoon says that soon the Cappies will hate Tiff even more than they hate them, and the king makes another southern remark, and the two laugh at them. In the Japanese original, the conversation is about the fate of activists, and I kind of feel that was a weird change that the English dub did. Tiff is then seen cleaning up from the group. Her brother warns her that the group is leaving, and she says that they have no concern for the environment. And Tuff complains that this is also bad, as we see Dee Dee and the ecotour group arrive in a very nice clearing with a cute little pond. The king says that this place is enticing, with Escargoon saying it is the perfect 18th hole. We then see Iroh holding a measuring stick as Escargoon measures stuff with his scope. Sadly, the poor boy goes behind a tree, which he complains about being in the way of his scoping. It is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he tells Chief Bookham to cut down a tree. After he hesitates, the king claims that according to feng shui, it is having a negative impact on the forest. Feng shui, for those who are curious, is a form of sort of Chinese historical pseudoscience that involves the placement of objects. For kids, in order to remove references to Asian culture, changed it to him saying, after Bookums expresses concern over Tiff's disapproval, saying that it will be fine as the other plants will now have, more sunlight to benefit from, which is technically a thing. They do that in forestry, remove some trees that allow others to grow better. As someone with a deep appreciation for money cultures, I find this censorship to be abhorrent. It's a cornerstone of Asian culture, and to remove this is just a evil. And that is all there is to it. The police chief in both versions, convinced by the king, starts cutting down trees left and right as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he pulls out a regular chainsaw, while the English dub by 4Kids, in an effort to avoid violent references, airbrushed it to look like a laser chainsaw, which, yes, is technically censorship, but it does cross the line where it actually improves the episode. I mean, seriously, it's a laser chainsaw. I mean, come on, it's a laser chainsaw. Bookums cuts down tree after tree as Cappy set up a fire to burn the extra wood. Escargot and Dedede chuckle about the Cappies doing their dirty work for them. Tiff runs over to much chagrin and tries to stop them, but a tree almost falls on her, much to the police chief's shock. Having enough, Tiff says that she won't let them continue their ecotour as they are actively destroying the forest, which is even worse than littering. King Dedede takes advantage of this and announces, due to complaints, the ecotour is now over, much to everyone's shock. Both the police chief, Bookham's wife, and the mayor are shocked at their abandonment in the middle of the woods. But Dedede says that Tiff will take over, as Escargoon points out that she is a know-it-all. Tiff asks if they can leave their supplies behind, but King Dedede denies this, as it's only a short hike home out of the woods, unless they get lost, and the two goobers laugh. The group head out of the forest, and Spikehead is concerned about their status, and the mayor tells him to ask Tiff. Tuff says not to blame his sister, as this is the king's fault, but Iro says it doesn't matter whose fault it is, and they just want to go home. Tiff says it's alright, as Chief Bookums knows the way, but he admits it's only fuzzy in his head, much to everyone's concern. Tiff thinks it over, but then the bushes shake, and a bear emerges, chasing the group through the woods. It's a long chase, and eventually, due to their fear, they fall over an edge of a cliff, with all of them falling down the very steep, cliff, with Kirby rolling. He tries to stop himself, but it doesn't really work, and they crash into the tree. The group are left in a pile of pain, but we then cut back to the bear, which is really revealed to be King Dedede in a costume. Escargoon says they can now start on the country club, and Dedede makes an unbearable bear pun, and the two laugh. The group continue to walk through the woods, and Tiff leads them, saying that given Cappy Town is to the west, and if they follow the sunset, they'll eventually get out. Bookham's wife says she hopes that they'll get out before nightfall, while her husband says that if not, they'll have to sleep out, with the mayor saying it could be fun as he hasn't, done this since he was a child, but Bookham's wife is not pleased at the idea. Tiff, however, stops, much to the group's confusion, and says that they've been going in circles. Spikehead is in denial, but Honey confirms it by pointing out how she remembers the fallen tree. The mayor wonders how they'll get home, and Bookham's wife is worried as well, as Bookham points out how they barely have any time left before sunset. And Tiff says it's dangerous to hike at night, so they will make a campsite, as we see Tuff and Kirby setting up a bed. Tiff returns to them while they're setting up their campsite with a handful of safe-to-eat mushrooms and tells them to get some wood for a fire. This shocks the group, as Tuff asks for an explanation, and she explains that while she would rather not, it's now a matter of survival. She then tells Bookums to get some fish and Kirby to get some fruit. The group set up a fire, eating a decent meal. Bookums and his wife talk about the bed, while the mayor worries about the bear. Tuff and Kirby say they will stand watch the night, as we shift to the next day. Waking up, we see Dedede and Escargoon have wrapped up their plans. They go to leave, but Escargoon says they can't bring all their stuff back. as indeed they did pack a lot. The king says that they'll just leave it for Whispy. We see them crossing an old bridge. Dedede crosses it carelessly, but Escargoon is a lot more nervous due to it being in poor shape and, great age. The king is confused at the senile snail as he tries to explain to the king that the bridge is unsafe to be on, because the king then starts shaking the bridge. Escargoon tries to get him to stop, but the king ignores him and eventually breaks the bridge due to the movement and his weight, sending the two into the river below. They are then flowed down the river. As we then cut back to Tiff and the group, resting from walking, Tuff says that it's a good idea as the Cappies say that the woods seem to go on forever. Tiff looks forwards and sees a river, saying that it'd be good if they had a boat. And Tuff points to something in the river, picking it up. It's revealed to be the bag that Dedede had. Spikehead says that it has a map that they can use to get out, and Tiff says, oddly, that there's a golf course on it, and Tuff states the obvious that this whole thing was a cover for him planning his country club, as the mayor and Bookums reflect on their measurements they took and the trees that they cut down so cruelly. Tiff says they gotta stop him, but first they gotta escape back to town. We then cut to Escargoon helping Dedede out of the river. As they talk, we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese version, Dedede professes his love for Escargoon, as the two cry, thinking that they are about to die. The English dub, due to being released in the beginning of the 2000s, well before LGBT people were really accepted, removed this out of fear for parental backlash, changing it to him saying that his golf course idea was selfish, to which Escargoon agrees, causing the king to get angry before the realization of them being lost in the woods caused them both to break down crying. I'll return to this and go in more depth when I talk about the episode's negatives, but this is paused when Escargoon sees Tiff, Tuff, and the others passing by. They try to call to them, but it's no use as the river is just too loud. Realizing this, they decide to start a signal fire. It is here that we see the last change between versions. In the Japanese original, after Dedede promises a bonus if they start a fire, Escargoon makes a reference to a Japanese rhyme where a broken promise leads to them having to swallow needles. Apparently, they use the word for blowfish as a pun. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense in English, and it's honestly the reason why it was removed. Not a huge loss, and it's still censorship, but I think given the fact that the original Japanese pun really doesn't make sense in English, that this change between versions was perfectly fine. The fire starts as the group continue their march. Tuff says the king is unintentionally helping them thanks to the map they got. Tiff, however, stops and realizes that if they got the map, then the king and Escargoon must be lost. The others have little sympathy for the two buffoons, as they kind of deserved this fate, but Kirby points to the smoke billowing from a nearby region. We cut to the two goobers who are growing the fire, which eventually grows beyond their control. Escargoon is worried, but the king is positive, as it will cause the destruction of the forest, while making a lot of charcoal they can then use for their country club. The two then run off as we go to the commercial break. We're zooming from the commercial break. We see the forest on fire as animals flee for their lives. Tuff and the others watch, with the mayor saying Whispy will be destroyed as Tiff tells everyone to stay near the river. We see Dedede and Escargoon trapped in the burning forest. Dedede blames Escargoon and starts hitting him in the head as trees collapse, but luckily Escargoon isn't a spiteful person and helps carry them to safety. We see Whispy Woods raise his roots to protect his patch of lovely flowers. Dedede and Escargoon enter into this clearing, not realizing where they are until the king sees Whispy, who then grabs the pair. The pair beg to be released so they can escape the fire, with the king saying it was an accident, but Whispy holds them, planning on having them pay for their horrible mistake being burned along with the forest. Tiff and the others flee, but are stopped by the river. Tuff points out that the flames are getting closer. Iroh suggests Kirby suck up the fire, but Tiff says it's too large, as her brother says that not even a Star Warrior could stop this. However, we then see Captain Waddle Doo for his first appearance without Waddle Dee's accompanying him. He seems to be riding this sort of a little helicopter that's honestly kind of cool looking, and he asks where the king and Escargoon are. With nothing to lose, Tuff tells Kirby to suck him up, and Kirby does so, the helicopter blade being separated from the rest of it as he becomes. Tornado Kirby, an ability first introduced in Kirby's Adventure. I've gone more in depth on this ability in my review of 4 previous episodes, those being Episode 16, A Fish Called Kine, Episode 22, Island of the Lost Warrior, Episode 32, A Dental Dilemma, and Episode 62, Mabel Turns the Tables. So check those out if you'd like to learn more specifics, but to keep it brief and to prevent excessive repetition, I think it really made the transition to the anime well. And this episode marks its last appearance. It's kind of sad to see that we've gone to the point where we'll be seeing abilities' last appearances, but honestly, I think it's fitting. It shows how far we've come in this retrospective. We see Kirby jump into the river and, under Tiff's instructions, starts sucking up the water in his tornado, thing. We cut back to Whispy, who has started to catch fire as King and Escargoon blabber about their demise. Tiring of their whining, Whispy Woods lets them go. As they are about to be burned, the water arrives and puts out all of the flames. Everyone cheers Kirby on, except Waddle Doo is frankly just confused as to what exactly is going on. The animals return to the forest, and Dedede and Escargoon cheer their survival, but are struck by lightning for their crimes. We then cut to the next day as we see the king and Escargoon are planting each tree that they destroyed. The king growls and complains and asks about a lunch break, but Whispy Woods then whips them as people laugh, and he reminds them to keep working and that he'll have to replant every tree that was destroyed. The king complains as he rightfully points out that this will take weeks, to which Tiff says it should be easy as they're good at doing dirty work, and the episode ends on Kirby smiling. Now that we've finished the story, let's talk about the episode's positives, negatives, and my final thoughts on the whole. Starting with the plot, overall I thought it was alright. Sure, it wasn't the most exciting story we've seen in the series, but I think an ecotour does fit the Kirby's, laid-back nature of the series, and the ending sequence is quite intense for the setting. Plus, this would also mark the conclusion to the recurring plotline of Dedede trying to create his country club/golf course. And, I think this is a fitting end, as Dedede truly suffers a lot more of a consequence compared to the last few attempts. Plus, I think Tiff's role was engaging and nuanced, but I'll return to that in a bit. Going on to the theme of this episode, once again we see environmentalism as the main one, which is something we've seen in several videos up to this point. But this, again, while some would consider this to be a bit repetitive, there's another sub-angle of environmentalism that involves this episode, that being ecotours, which are in fact real and are somewhat controversial, as there are concerns about the pollution left behind often and how sometimes they don't really have all the best intentions due to bothering animals. With that being said, I do still think the episode portrayed the issue in a somewhat exploitative way, at least in terms of how it was handled by Dedede. So I think it represented the problems of ecotours well, while also giving a positive bent to it with what Tiff knows and showing what it could possibly be good. It was also nice to see Whispy Woods again, and for Tornado's last appearance, I think it went with a bang. He utilized this in a more environmental power to its maximum by saving a forest from a forest fire. With that being said, I think it's about time we start with some of the negatives of this episode. Starting with one that I find the weakest. A lot of people like to say that Tiff is particularly excessively annoying in her preaching of this episode, and I can kind of understand it. Like, even as someone who's a biology major, I have to admit, getting upset at a little girl for picking a flower or someone picking up a handful of leaves is silly. That's not really going to hurt a forest, if they keep doing it, obviously, but like one incident's not really going to harm that. With that being said, though, her practicality at the end of the episode in preparation for the night shows that she's not a complete straw man. With that being said, though, for me, the bigger issues were the censorship machine in the episode. From the silly marks on the can and the brochure to the admittedly slight improvement by the removal of that really weird pun. The worst censorship was the relationship between Dedede and Escargoon. Despite what some liars may say from, Project H&K, I'm not bigoted against LGBT people, and I think it's a shame that it was censored due to the early 2000s moral hysteria. I mean, these were both adults, and so the presentation wouldn't really have been that bad, unlike with, say, other episodes where people draw creepy fan art of minors. Deity and Escargoon are both adults, so I don't really have an issue with it. And I think it's kind of a shame, as I think this could have been some of the first truly, representation of LGBT people in child's media had they not censored it. But in the end, they did, and just kind of a shame, really. Overall, this is a perfectly fine, if somewhat forgettable episode. Nothing, awful or a waste of time. Not a must watch either. You'll enjoy it if you're watching the series as a whole, but don't fret if you miss it. It's definitely just sort of an okay episode. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master. If you like this video, like it, but if you loved it, consider liking and subscribing. And join me next time for the Kirby Right Back at You retrospective. Have a wonderful day.